Good afternoon, everyone. You're very welcome. My name is Mark Beckett, and I'm part of the Mintel Ireland team. It's a pleasure to connect with you virtually and share some of the latest valuable content from Mintel. Today, also, we are co-hosting with OCO Global, and we'll hear from Gareth Hagan from OCO Global in a moment. Firstly, what is Mintel? Mintel is the expert in what consumers want and why. As the world's leading market intelligence agency, our analysis of consumers, markets, new products, and competitive landscapes provides a unique perspective on global and local economies, helping businesses make the right decisions at the right time. Mintel. Now, a few words from Gareth Hagan, Deputy CEO, OCO Global. All right, Gareth.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. I'm just going to share my screen, Mark. Basically, thanks for the intro there, and I promise I won't keep you too long before we get to the main event in terms of Benjamin from Mintel. So, can everybody see that? Okay, Mark, if you just give me a thumbs up, and then we can go. Yeah, perfect. Good stuff. So, look, guys, very grateful to be with you all this afternoon. I won't take too much of your time, but just a little bit of an introduction to OCO Global, basically, who are kind of a proud partner of Mintel in the Irish market. As Mark mentioned, Mintel are a leading provider of consumer market data, and OCO, I suppose, are a little bit more at the practical end of basically doing business and supporting doing business internationally. So we're an Irish company. We're headquartered across both Belfast and Dublin. 20 years in operation, and very pleased and proud to have worked with a number of folks on the call. We've grown to having about 125 consultants who are kind of close to potential markets and close to potential customers across the world. And we do that working with both companies directly and also through Enterprise Ireland, Invest Northern Ireland, and other government agencies with which you'll be familiar. As I mentioned, basically very pleased for the last decade or more to have worked with Mintel in the Irish market as well. So what do we do? Basically, as I mentioned, we support companies in a number of different ways, basically to help them to grow their business internationally. That can take many forms in terms of either sort of defining strategy and defining the right market for you to grow your business. We also increasingly are supporting companies with cross-border M&A and kind of helping companies to identify the right partners and acquisition targets. And having done one or other of those two things, we also work flexibly with companies in international markets, helping them to staff, to market, and to grow their business. So we work very much kind of in a collaborative sort of way with our clients. And that really spans, I suppose, all the activities, and we'll talk a little bit about this later in the presentation, that sort of go from making a market assessment or conducting kind of preliminary market research, where Mintel and Mintel's products are key really to kind of understanding and defining the opportunity. And working through, as I mentioned, some of the practical implications of that, and converting, research into strategy and strategy into action in terms of helping companies with their international activities through customer partner searches, helping you to navigate kind of international markets. And as I mentioned, acting on your behalf in some cases as you scale your business and grow your business internationally. We have very significant experience in working in the food and beverage sector. And as I mentioned, proud to have worked with a number of folks on the call. You see on the slide here, basically a selection of the clients that we've worked with in the last sort of 5 years, and a number of familiar names there from an Irish perspective. But as you'll see, basically kind of increasingly and over that period, we've also worked with a number of kind of national, international, and global brands across those activities that I mentioned on the previous slide. Kind of taking the market entry and the market research kind of fundamentals, and then helping companies to win business and win deals kind of internationally. And just as an example of that, I quote an example here of a recent client, which is Match Direct, which is an Irish company that we've worked with in the last couple of years, and we've been successful in helping Match Direct grow their business from a largely UK kind of base to an international business across Europe, the Middle East, and Asia. Europe, the Middle East, and the US. And actually in the US market, basically, as you can see, We worked hand in glove with MassDirect in terms of starting with a market assessment to understand the opportunity for the client in that region, followed by kind of a more granular distributor and partner search. And then we undertook a sort of on-the-ground program of business development, which resulted in MassDirect securing distribution and listings in an initial set of retailers on the East Coast of the US. And they've kind of continued to grow their business from that footprint. We also at OCO have developed a suite of tools to help you to grow your business abroad. So we have a sort of significant partner and referral network where you can search and select other providers and other partners to help you grow your business, from lawyers to accountants to sort of HR services, and all of those kind of partners that are important and essential to help you to grow your business internationally. And maybe just in closing, before I hand over to Benjamin, I mean, having done this for a number of years, basically a couple of perhaps slightly tongue-in-cheek, but pieces of advice from me in terms of growing your business internationally. First thing is, biting off more than you can chew. If I had a sort of a penny for every time that I saw this happen in terms of kind of clients or companies that try to grow perhaps kind of too quickly or not in such a coordinated way. And our approach is certainly to kind of, land on the right opportunities, but be prudent and sensible in terms of how you approach them. Certainly, if I had $1 for every time someone kind of on a plane told me kind of something and I took that at face value, I'd be a rich man. But joking aside, kind of taking good advice and not basically kind of, believing or kind of, acting on the first and the only piece of advice you hear is something that I would certainly recommend as well. Practically, going into business internationally, requires some homework and requires proper support. Different legal systems, different regulatory environments. Benjamin, I'm sure, we'll talk a little bit about that in the context of packaging, but really important basically that you do your homework and you avoid some of the legal or regulatory traps that might come your way. And just the final kind of two pieces, basically, lost in translation. So, doing business internationally requires you to adapt and in some cases conform to kind of different market norms and different cultural kind of differences from what we're accustomed to closer to home, and taking time and taking advice around basically adapting to that environment, is a really a kind of crucial, practical kind of step to ensure your success. And of course, a commitment to stay the course. So, international business, can be extremely lucrative, and certainly in Ireland, basically, it's an essential or semi-essential kind of way to grow beyond our fairly small kind of domestic economy. But one must be realistic about the time, the effort, and the outcome, basically that will yield, basically, a commitment to stay the course and not be unrealistic about basically how quickly or how big is going to be fundamentally important as well. So with that, basically, I'll pass back to Mark. I hope that's been useful in setting the scene a little bit to the international kind of challenge, and I look forward to kind of hearing more from Benjamin and from yourselves in terms of the Q&A and panel at the end. So back to yourself, Mark.
Thank you, Gareth. Yes, I would just like to introduce our guest speaker, Dr. Benjamin Punchard, Global Packaging Insights Director at Mintel. Benjamin's going to deliver actionable insight on the packaging sector, drawing on over a decade of international experience. Before I do so, I just want to make you aware at this stage, there is a Q&A facility, so please feel free to annotate any questions there, and we'll handle them at the end of the presentation. Very much appreciated. And over to you, Benjamin.
Thank you, Mark. Yes, today I'm going to be looking at two aspects of packaging that are really top of mind for consumers at the moment. The first being the impact of COVID-19 as we move into the next normal, and the second being climate concerns, both really strong trends that are driving consumers to consider the way they shop, and obviously that has a massive impact on the packaging choices that they have, but also the packaging strategies that brands and retailers might want to develop. So we know that obviously COVID is top of mind for consumers, but is it top of mind when it comes to the products they're buying? We know that the majority of transmission is person to person, But there's a lot of doubt and a lot of confusion over potential other routes. And indeed, the research itself is often unclear in terms of the virus reside times on different materials. So let's look at what consumers are actually telling us in terms of their concern. Well, we've got here 55% of Irish consumers report that they're now more concerned about the safety of unpackaged food. And it's not just around food, it's also around the hygiene of beauty and personal care, for example. So we do have this greater concern over general hygiene and the potential routes of the virus into our homes or into the products that we're using. So what's the role of packaging in this? Well, if again we ask consumers, we see here that 65% of Irish shoppers are concerned about who may have touched a product's packaging before they pick it up. So this concern is around, okay, in the shopper environment, how is that product getting to me? Is this a secure supply chain? And as a result of that, we're seeing different activities around the way consumers are prepared to protect themselves. One strategy here is leave it be. So around a third of Irish consumers are leaving packaged goods for a period of time after they've bought them to allow the virus to die off. This is a strategy that was particularly sort of made aware to consumers around things like e-commerce, where a lot of e-commerce retailers talked about leaving the product inside your door when it arrived for 24 hours before you opened it up. So that's where that sort of idea comes for. But a larger number, about half of Irish consumers, are actually actively disinfecting or washing products when they get them home. And this obviously has a really strong impact on the kind of packaging that is suitable for that sort of behavior. When we consider that consumers, when they're shopping, are going to be looking at packaging structure, considering, well, is this something that, one, protects the product, but two, something that I can clean when I get home? They're not going to want folds, they're not going to want hidden areas, they're going to want surfaces that are easy to clean, so shiny surfaces rather than matte, for example. Might be a strategy that we see to enable the activity that consumers are engaging in order to keep themselves safe. But there are ways beyond this that packaging structure can communicate to the consumer that a product is safe. Now, whilst I don't think that we're going to see the development of packaging that says COVID safe, or we've taken enhanced actions to protect you, because when we buy these products, mainly food and drink products and beauty and personal care products, we might be considering these attributes when we first purchase them as a shopper, when we open them at home. But when we're consuming, that's not something we want to be thinking about. It's not something that brands really want to bring to that sort of branded moment of consumption and associate their brand with those sort of actions. So we're seeing slightly more covert activities, things around simply using structure to convey safety. And a really good example of a historical packaging that does that is the San Pellegrino can here with the aluminium peel-off foil. Now, obviously, this enables a brand to have another moment of branding. This is a branded cap. It's an advertising space on a can that would otherwise be unused. But what it also does is it visually tells the shopper that that part of the packaging is protected from contamination and will be protected from contamination until the moment of consumption, until the consumer opens it up and starts to consume it. So that is where we can start to consider how packaging structure can communicate to that shopper that those consumption points or those application points have been protected from contamination. And here we're looking at a number of sort of different strategies that packaging can respond. The first is a launch from China. And actually this was before COVID, and the strategy here is to respond to consumers who are concerned about eating a snack and then having greasy fingers that would not sort of be perfect for using their mobile phones. So what Three Squirrels did with this nut-based snack is that it's a pouch, but it has an inner gusset that contains a wet wipe, which means the consumer can consume the product and then wipe their fingers. But that kind of embedded cleanliness, that idea of giving the consumer a way to clean fingers could be easily extended to, one, cleaning your fingers before you consume an on-the-go product, to reassure consumers that they can start to return to consuming on the go, or even enabling the consumer to clean the packaging themselves, giving them the ability to do an action that we know they are undertaking. And as we sort of become more normalized in terms of our responses to the pandemic and are leaving the home more often, that kind of on-the-go consumption is an area where we really are going to need to see packaging step up its game in terms of giving consumers that reassurance that at the point of consumption, the food product has been kept secure. Similarly, we're seeing strategies in beauty. In beauty care, we have a lot of airless being used. So this is packaging where the product comes out, but no air goes back in to replace that. And this enables a lower use of preservatives, for example. So it's really good for clean label. Now, what we've started to see is an increase in on-pack discussion of that kind of technology. So this is no longer a hidden technology that is there to enable clean labeling. We're seeing discussions on pack around the technology that enables that product to be kept hygienic and secure. And so we're seeing that being played forward as a client-facing attribute. The other thing we're seeing is single serve. And this is a good example from beauty. This is actually a launch from Poland. So it's a single serve sachet to enable, again, that idea that the product I'm using has been completely hermetically sealed until the point of consumption or the point of use. It's not just in terms of how we use the product at home that COVID has an impact on, it's also that shopper moment, not just in terms of that sort of psychological barrier between something that looks protected and unprotected, but we also see a large number of consumers are actually just simply limiting the amount of time they spend in store. Over half of Irish shoppers have reported to Mintel that they are limiting the amount of time they spend in store. And there are a number of drivers for this. One might be that we don't want to dwell in a scenario where we're around other people, when we're trying to limit person-to-person contact. Another simply might be social pressure. We know that on occasion we have to queue now to get into store, that store time is limited, and therefore we don't want to squander that, and we don't want to be seen to be squandering it. But whatever the reasons, we're seeing that Irish consumers are massively reducing the amount of time they spend in store. And this is at a time when perhaps we're trying to communicate with them around more and more attributes that we can offer to provide healthy foods or to limit contact, but at the same time we have a much reduced window in terms of speaking to them. So how can we respond to this? Well, one is simply through recognizing the importance of design in capturing attention in store. And here's a really good example of a recent a design change from Brewdog, the beer brand, that really highlights how a design change can maintain or improve that brand recognition and enable very fast in-store product choice. So in the old design here, we see that the can is very busy. We have different layers of text overlaid on each other, and the text is at 90 degrees. Well, obviously, whilst it's quite funky, in some respects, it's very difficult to read. And I mean, nobody walks around the supermarket with the head tilted at 90 degrees. But with the new design, firstly, we've got Brewdog very, very clear. We're recognizing the brand that we want in store very, very quickly. And then beyond that, a very simple use of bold colors in order to differentiate the product variant. So again, what we're moving from is something that maybe we need to take a bit of time to understand and to decipher, to something that we're getting across our communication in the fastest time possible. And it's not just in terms of recognizing the brand, but it's also in terms of communicating some of the needs that consumers have, particularly at the moment. And one of those needs is obviously health boosting products. We know here, for example, that 45% of Irish consumers are reporting regularly including immune boosting foods in their diet. So we're looking to foods to increase our resilience to illness, but it's not just in terms of physical health, it's also in terms of mental health. So we're seeing consumers turn to the products that they buy to improve their mood or to reduce anxiety and stress. And that's across both food and beauty and personal care. So we're seeing consumers looking to packaging to deliver on some quite advanced needs. And here we've got some simple examples of products that are doing just that. I mean, the first from the US is Suja Organic, and they've released a variant called Immunity, a very simple way, just using that product name to talk about the main claim around this particular variant, which is that it's immunity boosting. The product in the middle there, Well Bites from Sweden, obviously it's a health-oriented candy snack, but what they've done here is they've recognized the importance of talking about particular vitamins in terms of immunity, whilst obviously updating a print press and printing a whole new sort of range of flexible plastic is quite involved. A simple solution here is just to simply stick a sticker on the front of the pack that highlights the one thing that consumers are looking for at the moment, which is immune boosting, and the reason why that immune boosting claim is being made by this product. So they're using a very simple low-tech solution to get a message out very quick. And that solution obviously would work in terms of as the pandemic evolves and people have different requirements and different solutions, it enables a quick response to that. In beauty, we see the borrowing of claims in order to link to health. For example, here we've got probiotic skincare, and probiotic within foods has long been associated with immune boosting functions in terms of the link between gut health and immunity. And so by borrowing some of these terms that are focused on immune health, we can take that self-care regime into our beauty regime and provide a holistic solution. The other aspect that we've seen in terms of shoppers is in terms of if we're shopping less frequently, say once a week rather than every day, and we're seeing the effects of consumer stockpiling in terms of shelf outages, etc. Consumers are returning to longer shelf life foods. Here we see 43% of Irish consumers are regularly buying long life food and drinks. As a result of the outbreak, we're seeing consumers return to frozen food. Now, this is a very big change in terms of that shopper behavior from before the pandemic, when typically, obviously, we'd be coming home from work, we'd be commuting, we'd often pop into the store and buy what we would need for that evening or for a short period of time. But now we're considering a longer period of time. We're thinking about food waste in a different way. And that has meant that our footfall no longer simply goes around the edge of store to fresh foods, to bakery, to the deli. We're seeing consumers return to that center of store. And that is a huge opportunity for reinvigorating some of these pack types, metal cans, pouches, glass jars, in terms of the perception of healthiness, the nutrition, as being equivalent to fresh, but also re-premiumizing a sector that has started to become more commoditized, so bringing premium. And we're seeing that in terms of increased launches of unusual flavors and variants that start to premiumize some of the categories that we see in center of store. So in the second part of this presentation, I want to focus a little bit more on the environment. Someone the other day I was talking to, and they said, well, sort of COVID has pushed the environment off the top spot in terms of consumer concern when it comes to packaging. I think that's a bit misleading, because I don't think sustainability has ever been top of mind for consumers when it comes to packaging. Ease of use, does it protect the product? Is it dispensable? There's a whole host of things that consumers have always looked for and will always look for. And although we saw an increase in sustainability, it never was at the top spot. So hygiene has maybe pushed it down a little bit, but it hasn't eliminated it. We see here, for example, 61% of Irish consumers, more important to protect food hygiene than minimize plastic waste. Well, yes, so we are having a short-term element where consumers are perhaps a little bit more willing to give plastic packaging the benefit of the doubt if they think it's providing the hygiene barriers that they're looking for. But that said, we're seeing 33% of Irish consumers saying the environment is a higher priority, and we're still seeing consumers reporting that pollution from bottles and the like in the environment is a concern for themselves. So the idea that sustainability is no longer a consumer concern is I think, incorrect. And we can see that for a number of reasons. I think we're actually going to see an increase in environmental concern as we see this narrative emerge that the pandemic was caused by our broken relationship with nature. And therefore, we're going to see a linking between planet health and our own personal health as time develops. We're also seeing that even though COVID may be the thing that's number one in the news headlines, this hasn't completely pushed plastic pollution out of the news. Here's just a couple of headlines that I've seen in the recent period. So one from May, one from August, both around microplastics in the environment. So we're still seeing this something that the media is interested in and that is being pushed to consumers as an item of concern. And we're seeing that as a response, consumers are prepared to pay more for bottled water with microplastics filtered out. So that link between environmental health and personal health is still being reinforced. And because of this focus in particular on plastic pollution in the marine environment, we're seeing perhaps a focus on marine products such as fish, but also on ocean plastic. And this is a really interesting launch. It's the first I know of in food where ocean plastic, which we've seen emerging in household, has jumped a category into food. And so this pack is partially made with what's called ocean-bound plastic. So it's not necessarily from the ocean, but it's from the beaches and rivers. So that is a source of material. So that kind of innovative claim is something we're seeing increase. However, if we look at the actual launches across Ireland and what the claims are on pack, we see a very, very clear picture. This is looking at a number of different sustainable packaging claims. And we can see that the large purple bar, which is increasing over time, is recyclable packaging, reaching over 30% of Irish FMCG launches in 2019 made a recyclable claim, far beyond any other claim. So things that are more novel, like plant-based plastics, for example, like biodegradable, whilst we do see niche launches, at the end of the day, the thing that consumers see and the things that consumers that can action on are recyclable packaging. There's two other things to note. One is that yellow bar, which is sustainable forestry. Obviously, we have a lot of paper and carton-based packaging, and across Europe, the use of sustainable forestry claims on board cartons is high, and that has been sustained. But the other thing is that small light blue bar there, made with recycled materials. And although it's small, what we have seen is since 2006, 2017, that has grown quite dramatically from a very small base. And so it is still quite small, but that's where we're seeing a lot of innovation now across both food, personal care and household, is this attempt to increase the amount of recycled content to close that loop and to communicate to the consumer that their recycling actions have been validated. And as we see that this emerging as a claim, we're seeing brands trying to communicate to the consumer how this is beneficial, but also to relate it to those activities that consumers undertake. Here's a really interesting example from New Zealand. And this is a pack that uses recycled material. And on pack, it describes that as being the material equivalent to a recycled 600 milliliter water bottle. And I think that's really interesting because what it's doing is it's saying to the consumer, when you recycle your bottle, this is the outcome. It's validating a consumer's action, and it's linking this brand to that consumer action. So I think that's a very strong way of making this more relevant to the consumer, but also to essentially validate their activity. And we can see that increasingly coming through in terms of what we're seeing now is not just claims around this material is recycled, but actually it comes from a very specific recycled source. So we've seen emergence of ocean plastic, and that's now being developed into things like social plastic. This example here from Sweden talks on pack about the ocean plastic being collected off beaches, and that being not just a social activity, but supporting different social groups in terms of low-income groups being supported. So it's making a more detailed claim about the source of that recycled material. The central one from Japan is 7&I, and this is really intriguing. This is a a retailer that actually collects PET bottles at store through a reverse vending machine, and then they use that PET as part of a multi-laminate film. And on the back of this pack, it says this is made from recycled material that you return to your local 7 & I store. So again, very much linking the brand's activity to the consumer and saying, essentially, we're working together to do this. A similar claim from Netherlands here, from the CG product, which is made from recycled material, but it makes a very specific claim that this is made from recycled material collected in the Netherlands. So again, validating consumer activity and making it link to the actions that consumers are taking. The other thing that I think is going to become increasingly important as a measure, not just across product and packaging, but in all aspects of our lives, and that's carbon and carbon measures. And we can see that when we talk to consumers. Here, over half of Irish consumers, for example, agree that climate change is going to have an impact on the foods and drinks that they buy. We know that climate change is impacting the world. We've seen this year the devastating fires in both Australia and America. So climate change is no longer an occasional thing. It's extreme weather events that are having a devastating impact on people's day-to-day lives. And as a result, we're going to see increasing demands that brands own up to their carbon footprints and engage in actions to reduce them. And consumers, just as they have done in the plastic debate, wanting to understand why plastic is being used and where it should and shouldn't be used so that they can reduce their plastic footprint, are going to want to have similar measures across the products that they buy, because that's the first step enabling consumers to reduce their carbon footprint. And it's not just something that we can do in isolation. Here, a really good example from Denmark that combines that need to reduce our plastic footprint with that carbon dioxide claim. So here, the packaging is partially made from recycled plastic. So it talks about that closed loop, which we know that consumers are increasingly engaging with, but also uses that as a narrative to talk about the reduced CO2 output as a result of that move. We're also seeing that this being used as a comparator between different pack types. And this is both an opportunity, but also potentially a threat. In this example here, for example, we see a soup in a pouch, and on that pack, it talks about the fact that as a lightweight pack, this has a lower carbon emission footprint than a metal can of equivalent size. So again, what we're potentially seeing is different pack types being compared and contrasted. And as such, this is the time to consider the carbon footprint of both our products and packaging, and how we might create a narrative that shows the actions that as a brand we're taking to reduce that footprint overall. So just a few conclusions. Hygiene, and COVID-19. We need to revisit and reconsider formats that limit the touches that consumers need to do in order to use that product, or simply to purchase that product and get it home. And consider the way that structure can communicate the protection of maybe the consumption point or the usage point of a product. The circular economy is becoming increasingly important. We've seen that recycling has become almost a hygiene factor in packaging. If you're going to say that you're sustainable as a packaging solution, at the very basis, you have to be recyclable, and any other claims have to build up from that. But increasingly, consumers are saying, well, I put a lot of material in my recycle bin, where is it all going? And in order to be reassured that that action is working and that brands are involved in both the end of life as well as creating products in the first place, we're increasingly seeing recycled material claims as a way for brands to show their engagement in that closed loop. But going forward, I think we're going to see a real big focus on carbon and carbon measures. And obviously that's going to have a huge impact on the packaging choices that are available and how we frame those in terms of carbon. And it's not just in terms of the packaging material, but going forward, I think all of our sustainability claims on pack are increasingly going to be framed around carbon reduction. So with that, I thank you, and I'll return to Mark.
Thank you very much, Benjamin. Wonderful. I really appreciate the great presentation, and I'm sure everyone's in agreement. Just for bringing recent insights around packaging to life. Just as we said, there are a couple of questions that come through. We're probably not going to be able to take them all, but I will take a couple here, and we could probably take a couple of them offline as well. So the first one, Benjamin, if I could pose to you, you mentioned how COVID-19 is affecting the shopper. How do you think the pandemic is changing use and consumption occasions, and how might this impact packaging?
Yeah, well, of course, I mean, we've got a massive reduction perhaps in on-the-go consumption, but that's been replaced by consumption in the home. We have data from consumers across Europe that shows that snacking in the home, for example, has increased. So we're not changing what we're consuming, we're simply changing where we're consuming it. And obviously we can then respond to that in different ways. So maybe that might be bigger pack sizes, because we're now shopping for a week rather than a day. It might be that we're buying multi-packs rather than buying a single unit. The way that we've changed our consumption is simply by removing the commute time for a lot of people who are now working from home, and spending more time in the home. We're trying to provide ourselves with ways to fill that time in an enjoyable way, and one of those is cooking at home. So one of the things that we've seen is packaging that tries to either engage the consumer in considering that product as an ingredient. So that might be something that you would normally consider to be a product in its own right, talking about ingredients on pack and how it might be used. But other things might be looking at ways of dispensing the product, so it can be used in baking, or it can be used as portioned wise, so that it assists consumers, because we've got a lot of consumers returning to scratch cooking, but not necessarily those consumers having the confidence of knowing what they're doing. So a brand that can say, yes, we'll help you scratch cooking by providing packaging that is relevant to the portion sizes you might need, or that provides support in terms of recipes, etc. Those are the sorts of things that are going to win in that space. And then beyond that, we've also got the need for sort of relaxation and indulgence in the home, and those kind of moments of things we do to make ourselves feel better. So we're looking at claims around mood, we're looking at things that can assist that. And a good example of that would be a Haagen-Dazs ice cream with their strategy of encouraging consumers all to buy the same flavor and to watch a movie at the same time, to have the feel of community whilst maybe being on their own. And that's where packaging that maybe links to social media through QR codes can start to deliver routes for brands to do that kind of engagement, providing a route for the brand to be part of that social engagement in the home. I think that's a really interesting opportunity.
Thank you, Benjamin. I think we'll have time for one more. Benjamin, if I can just pose the question to you. Beyond recycling, prior to the pandemic, there was a growing interest in refill and reuse. Do you think there are still opportunities in refillable packaging?
Yes, I do. And I think part of the reason for that was the momentum was so strong prior that I think it will continue. But also because we know that a lot of big brands have very sort of big innovation funnels, and sometimes they're difficult to move. So we've seen Nestle, for example, launching a trial in-store refill station in the height of lockdown. We've seen, I think, Beiersdorf in Germany has just released an in-store refill station for their personal care products. I think shower gel and skin cream, I think, are the products that they're releasing through that. So we're seeing activities through big brands who've recognized that actually that's a very sustainable way of getting products to consumers. Now, obviously, we do have consumer concern over contact, and when we talk to consumers, they are saying that COVID-19 has made them more wary of in-store refill. So whilst I think that might for some say, oh, well, we need to maybe consider this another time, I think actually what it needs to do is make us consider how we can use the opportunity of refill to actually offer some of those hygiene solutions that consumers are looking for. Things like I've seen no-touch refill for bottled water, for example. So it completely eliminates the need to touch anything that you haven't got complete control over yourself. You're bringing your own packaging that you know nobody else in store has touched. It hasn't been put on the shelf by a shelf stacker. It hasn't been picked up by a consumer sort of perusing the shelves. You have complete control over that. Then a no-touch dispenser means that it's not touched when it's filled. So it's about moving from maybe some very basic forms of refill that we saw when this trend was emerging at the beginning of last year, perhaps, to more sophisticated ways of refilling that actually answer consumers' concerns around hygiene rather than reinforce them.
Thanks again, Benjamin, for that. Unfortunately, that's all we have time for in terms of questions. There are a couple of others sitting there that I'll pose to you. We can get them answered for the audience. There are a few more there we can do offline, which we will do. And again, if I can just join and thank you again for the presentation. And be aware as well that there is a recording of the presentation. So if you want a copy of that, you can just reach out and we'll get that to you. And very lastly, just look out for more webinars in this series with the collaboration with OCO and Mintel. And all that leaves me to say is, look, thank you very much. Stay safe. Goodbye.